Hi there, welcome to the show. Another day of madness with COVID-19. We have the media pushing propaganda and disinformation, claiming that protesters were attacking police when we have the footage. It definitely shows the police instigating trouble, engaging with protesters first, when one gentleman was reading a passage out of the Bible stating to beware of the mark of the beast. We have pro-vaccine lunacy being spread all through the media. They want everyone to get this COVID-19 vaccination. People are scared. We've covered that here on the show. Very deceptive practices. We have police barging into people's homes, checking if they're self-isolating. Tyrannical measures are being taken, police brutality. One woman was thrown on the pavement with her child. It's disgusting what we're witnessing here at the moment. Stores requiring identification and personal details upon entry, otherwise purchases are denied. We have COVID-19 tests that are faulty and registering false positives on pawpaw and other fruits. It's a trap that's being set here, folks, and it's also stated that anybody that has had a flu shot in the last 10 years will test positive to COVID-19. California, they're stating by the 1st of June, if people don't have a COVID-19 test, their welfare payment will be suspended until completion of that test. Robots enforcing social distancing laws. They're using technology against the people. So it's very troubling circumstances that we're in. But for now, I'd like to introduce today's guest. So joining me is Karen Brewer. She has done fantastic work exposing Freemasonry and the evil and corruption that's associated with that. Thank you very much for joining me today, Karen. How are you going?
I'm going good, Jeff. How are you?
I'm managing okay. A lot of people are under immense amounts of stress with the COVID-19. I'm inundated with a lot of people are really struggling now, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And just on that, Jeff, it's absolutely essential that Australians hear Senator Bill Heffernan's speech that he made to the Senate Estimates hearing on the 20th of October 2015 with regards to the cover-up of the pedophiles in our parliaments. It is absolutely essential that every Australian sees that speech. Things that Senator Heffernan spoke about in that speech was that there was 28 prominent pedophiles named on just one document, that it was a police document, that it was signed off by Gary Crook QC, Assistant Commissioner to the Royal Commission for James Roland Wood in New South Wales. He also states there is a whole lot of documents naming a whole lot of prominent people. Now, how this started for me, Jeff, was that I watched Scott Morrison's sorry speech for the institutional and ritual sexual abuse, and frankly, that speech was absolutely disgraceful. I'm 52 years old. I grew up in the era of the Woods Royal Commission in New South Wales. I was, in fact, a young girl working in town when that Royal Commission was on. You couldn't live in New South Wales and not know about it. And when Scott Morrison stood up and gave that appalling sorry speech, I thought to myself, how do you get near on 50 years worth of politicians, local, state and federal, all silent on those suppression orders? And I sat down to work out what the common denominator was. My train of thought began with, well, pedophilia is a crime against children, so the first thing I need to establish is where all our politicians went to school. So I sat down and researched every politician, past and present, state and federal parliaments, and indeed the Lord Mayors of local councils. As I set about doing that research, the same schools continually cycled up generation to generation. And I thought that was very odd. So then I set to researching those schools, when they were founded by whom, and as I began to dig deeper and deeper, it is undeniable that they are all Freemason Demolay schools. Our politicians, past and present, all arise out of these Freemason Demolay schools across Australia. They are both private and public schools. There are a handful of public schools in every state that are in fact Freemason Demolay schools. That's not a coincidence. That's a network. Everybody, every normal Australian knows that incest and pedophilia are wrong. I firmly believe that. Yet we have parliamentary pedophile protecting suppression orders. We have good police officers that are removed from the police service during the course of investigations, like the police officers from William Turrell's case and alike. This network is extensive. One of the most disturbing things I discovered during the course of the research that I do, and I do it every day and it's still ongoing, was the Prime Minister Scott Morrison. His father, John Morrison, was in fact the Chief Inspector of Police, Division 10, New South Wales, whilst also being the Mayor of Waverley and Woollahra councils in New South Wales, and just so happens to be the same municipality that Brian Hewson set up his original Hillsong Church inside John Morrison's municipality. Senator Bill Heffernan's speech left behind many, many clues for us to follow, as did Franca Arena's a speech that she made in the New South Wales Parliament in the 1990s. This cover-up is huge and it is extensive, Australia. Now, it's very important that if we want to rectify any of the issues going on within Australia, it is very important that we all understand the Freemason Demolay connection. Every politician across the country, regardless of branding, shares. Political branding is absolutely a lie. There is no political branding in Australia. They are all Freemason Demolays. I know this because I've researched them all. Recently, Alistair Webster was arrested and charged with pedophilia. Alistair Webster was the superintendent of Durrock Boys Home in New South Wales from the late 70s to 1985. Alistair Webster was then promptly appointed as the federal politician for the seat of Macquarie in New South Wales, and he did in fact remain in our federal parliament until the mid-1990s. Now, how is it possible for the abuses that were going on those boys in the Durrock Boys Home, aided and assisted by Alistair Webster, and then he magically becomes a federal member of parliament? And yet we still have to this day parliamentary pedophile protecting suppression orders. The cover-up is extensive and involves every politician. There is no grey area here, Australia. Parliamentary pedophile protecting suppression orders are wrong. Every politician, past and present, has been silent on this issue, and in my view also makes them guilty. They are aiding and abetting criminal behaviours. It's as simple as that.
Very detailed research. And anybody that's aware of such crimes happening and they stay silent, they are in fact complicit. And with your investigative research, you discovered that they're all linked in through the education system, Freemason Demolay schools, as well as law enforcement, covering up and protecting such crimes when reported, and the media as well, suppressing any stories that come to light.
Our media in Australia, I have researched all the headline acts, past and present. Willisey, John Laws, Alan Jones, right through to people like that Fitzpatrick bloke, you know, the guy with the red bandana on his head.
Yep.
All of our, you know, the Stefanovic brothers,
yes.
You know, the list goes on and on, David Spears, all of it, Ali Wali, all of those people. When you research them all, they all are in fact Freemason Demolay. There is not one person in our media, on our mainstream media today, and I have researched extensively our media, I have not found one person that isn't connected to Freemason Demolay. People like Peter Credlin came out of Sacred Heart College in Victoria. She is a Freemason Demolay. She's married to Brian Loughnane. He is a Freemason Demolay. In relation to Brian Loughnane and Victoria specifically, people across Australia need to become aware of the Mornington Childcare Centre and the abuse that happened there in the early 1990s. That childcare centre was owned by a couple by the name of the Shulvers, and 24 children were abused in that childcare centre. They were taken to a nearby home. They were in fact sexually abused and physically abused. It's well documented. Some of the things that occurred to them, apart from the beatings and whatnot, was they were in fact defecated on by the adults involved. That particular instance, there was a police video, there was also forensic evidence. All of it disappeared from the police evidence locker. Nobody was charged. The investigation was shut down within a month. The Shulvers hired an attorney, and his name was Miles, M-Y-L-E-S, Stephen Miles, and he was later appointed as a judge in Victoria. Was Stephen Miles well rewarded for his silence?
Because it stems back to the oaths that they take at the Freemason Lodge. It's an oath of silence, and for their fellow brethren, they will not divulge anything incriminating. It's all through the processes that they take. So that's where you see a lot of the secret symbolism, their finger over the mouth. That is a statement saying that they've taken that vow of silence, and that's how come these perpetrators are able to continue these horrific crimes.
And the way we overcome that is by every normal Australian, every normal average Joe Australian, just like me, becoming aware of the network of Freemason Demolay filth that is in fact infected our judiciary, 100% infected, in my opinion. What my research shows to me, it is in fact 100% infection rate. You don't get called to the bar unless you've earned a lot of merit. You are called to the bar by merit, not experience. Every Australian needs to understand the two most important questions to ask of any political hopeful or any existing politician is: where did you go to school? Which primary school and which high school? And the second question to ask is: who's your daddy? You need to know what their fathers were involved with. Things like Rotary, Lions, all sorts of charity organisations. We'll just pause here for a moment to talk about charity organisations. Alan Maher, who was the Mayor of Gosford Council in New South Wales, was in fact one of the people involved in the abuses against the girls at the Parramatta Girls' Home. He was a protected spider while he continued to supply children for the judicial pedophile network. He has in fact been charged after all of these years. It's like sacrificing low-hanging fruit. He was in fact protected by many a politician across decades, in fact. We can no longer turn a blind eye to this network of filth, in my opinion. And every Australian needs to understand how the Freemason web of incest and pedophilia is woven, because once we understand how it's woven, it's very easy to tear it down.
Yes, we need to raise awareness on this subject to help the children, to prevent any more callous murders, satanic ritual abuse. It's rampant all through Freemasonry. You see, they worship Lucifer, and it's all happening. A lot of people are compromised. Secret videotapes. That's why they got the judges in their back pocket. The police commissioners, lawyers.
And now the abusers, the Freemason Demolay abusers, are in fact being rolled out upon every Australian, regardless of age, creed or colour. Our governments are now attempting to lock us all in our homes under draconian laws that are not in fact laws. They hijacked our constitution with the Australia Act. Gough Whitlam back in the 70s took constitutional studies out of schools for the purpose of dumbing down the population so that we were unaware of our rights. And to some extent, I guess it's been somewhat successful. However, given the events that happened last weekend in Macquarie Street, Sydney, with that young mum Renee and her 4-year-old child, and the behaviour of our police service, given the behaviour down in Victoria last Sunday towards Fanos and Craig Cole, also declaring publicly which primary school and which high school they go to, those questions are absolutely essential. We must never again in Australia elect any Freemason Demolay, ever. So we as a people have to get a lot better at how we detect them. Every Australian must know how to detect a Freemason Demolay, and you do that by asking those two questions. Where did you go to school and who's your daddy? Freemason lodges are in every district across Australia, and they do in fact walk amongst us. But we normal folk, we need to get a lot better about, we need to become skilled at learning how to identify them and expose them. That is in fact how we turn the tide on this filth. We outnumber them.
100%. And when you look at Child Protective Services, the Department of Children's Services, they're all involved in this child trafficking. And
yes, they are.
And they'll do anything they can to try and remove children from loving parents. We're seeing it lately. If a parent tests positive, even a false positive for COVID-19, they're trying to take the child, put the child into temporary foster home where they're going to be at risk of all types of dangers. So they're trying to use the system to abduct children.
Absolutely they are. Absolutely they are. That is their agenda. Just in relation to that, the Royal Commission's website, you can read 3,953 testimonies of fellow Australians that have had their testimonies, whilst heavily censored, they are indeed published. As you read through those, there are many tales in there of children that were taken out of orphanages for weekend or holiday leave to local Freemasons, where they were in fact abused by those people. Those people are in fact your grassroots level Freemasons, the ones frequenting your local lodge. And that's a fact, Australia. We have testimonies that we are able to read from that Royal Commission, including all the case studies, including PDF documents that can be downloaded from there and read through, including testimonies. It's undeniable, Australia. This is the network of incest and pedophilia across Australia, and all of them share a common denominator of Freemason Demolay. That's not a coincidence. Late last year, actually it was mid last year, there was the docks worker out of South Australia that was done for pedophilia. He was being interviewed on his way into court by a journalist, and he says to that journalist, "I am a pawn in a much bigger game." And he is indeed. He was sacrificed as low-hanging fruit. He was in fact supplying children for the jollies of other Freemason Demolays. And people need to watch that clip again. And he says that straight to the journalist. I am a pawn in a much bigger game, and it is a much bigger game. Senator Heffernan told you in that speech, there is a former Prime Minister on this list, and it's a police document. Gary Cook, QC, who signed off on that document, was in fact later appointed as the Queensland Integrity Commissioner. Do you believe that? Paddy Bergen, Patricia Bergen, who was also one of the assistants to the Commissioner, was later appointed as a judge. Their silence was well rewarded. And of course, the injustice towards the Australian people continues to this day.
It's very patronising and insulting to the victims how these people escape prosecution and then they smirk and laugh about it back down at the lodge. It's disgusting and it's despicable. Even the whole thought of taking a secret oath, it's been said it's repugnant. You know, keeping secrets, that's not honesty and that's not integrity whatsoever. And
no, they think they've been smart. They think this network of Freemason Demolay is a secret.
They're harmless. They're doing the right thing. But as I tell people, that's just their cover.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. What would you say to someone that doesn't believe it, that, you know, because they think, no, the image...
I would say to people that think charities are there to help people, okay? I would say to those people, you need to research the founding member of any charity, okay? Firstly, you need to locate that name, and then you need to know where did that person go to school and who's their daddy. I'll give you a classic example of this. Currently, the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister in the Australian Federal Parliament is a grub by the name of Ben Morton, who originally came from Wyle. Isn't that a coincidence? Penang Boys Home and all of that, you know. Anyway, Ben Morton, as a young man, started up his own charity, did Ben. He talks about it extensively in his maiden speech. And that charity was, in fact, funded by the state government. Of course, nothing came of it, and Ben Morton is mute on the injustice that is parliamentary pedophile protecting suppression orders. Ben Morton was, in fact, a networked spider insider. If you are silent on this issue of parliamentary pedophile protecting suppression orders, as far as I'm concerned, there's a big red flag over your head. If you're not speaking out in objection to parliamentary pedophile protecting suppression orders, if you are not sharing Senator Bill Heffernan's speech, then I would say to you, you are an enabler. This filth has gone on for decades in Australia, and the cover-up continues to this day. For God's sake, Australia, John Morrison's son is now sitting as the Prime Minister of Australia, and every Australian should be alarmed about that.
Exactly. It's organised crime. 100%.
Christian Porter, our current Attorney General, is a third-generation Freemason Demolay. That's a fact.
Yeah. And that's part of the criteria. Look at where they went to school, as well as look at some of the hand signalling that they're doing. You can see during the bushfire crisis and other major disasters, they're throwing up the 666, the pyramid hand sign. They like to show off, gesticulate, and throw up those Freemason symbols. And you also see them with the checkerboard and the compass and set square. They like to boast and brag about their affiliations and all their memberships with these lodges. They don't try and hide it, some of them.
You only have to look at the floor of our Federal Parliament House to know that.
Exactly. And you see some of the number plates, you've seen them turning up at the lodge, AL 666. They like to use numbers, occult numerology, mathematics. They're fixated on this. That's why you always see 33. There was 33 victims here. The person that was a witness, he just turned 33. You keep seeing these numbers, symbols, and hand signals everywhere when you open up your eyes, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And just in relation to that, the Institutional and Ritual Sexual Abuse Royal Commission that we've just had was nothing more than a scouting mechanism. And it was just a research facility, I believe, so that they knew how to plug the leaks. What they found during the course of that Royal Commission was that it takes on average between 22 and 23 years before a victim of paedophilia has matured enough to process the abuse and come out the other side able to talk about the abuse. On average, it takes 22 years, those of them that survive. And we cannot turn away from the fact many do suicide because there is no justice. They found it takes, on average, 22 years before a victim speaks out, which is why we now have the situation where our politicians are in fact cycled out of Parliament before the 22-year mark. Examples of this are Tony Abbott, Nick Xenophon, oh God, I could list them all, including state governments, all of the commissioners attached to that Royal Commission, and surprisingly enough, all of them are Freemason Demolay connected. All of them. Same as the High Court in Australia, all of them are in fact Freemason Demolay connected, and people wonder why Pell walks. Australians, average Joe Australians, need to understand this is the network of filth in our country, and you detect them by knowing where they went to school, which primary school, which high school, and who's their daddy.
Very well said. These are identifying markers for people. So
absolutely.
Hopefully we won't be deceived anymore. We can identify these criminals. It's organised crime. We'll be able to spread it on social media, look at their hand signalling, look at some of their past history. And you see...
And I would ask every Australian to please send the letters. The purpose of sending these letters is to let them know the jig's up, game's over. It's not a secret society anymore. We see you. And it lets them know we outnumber them.
Yes. And there's a vast tunnel network, an underground subterranean highway, and that's used to traffic children from lodges down to underground facilities, and it even goes to some of their homes as well. It's a labyrinth, and that's how come they're undetected, because they're travelling underground.
In relation to that, I would say to my fellow Australians, how is it possible that people like Fiona Barnett, who testified at the International Tribunal for Natural Justice, how is it possible that Fiona Barnett from New South Wales has the same story to tell as abuse victims in Ireland or England or Wales or America, when she was in fact on the other side of the world? I would ask you, why do we have near on 4,000 published testimonies, all detailing the same level of abuse that was also happening in institutions in Ireland, England, Wales, America? That's not a coincidence. All the evidence that's been put before us about MK Ultra, the scientific experiments they were doing on these children, and the fact that the timeline is happening around the world between the late 40s and still in fact ongoing today. How is that possible that that can be happening worldwide, Australia?
Exactly.
How is that possible?
It's the way they control it as well, isn't it? That's why you see people that are speaking out about the truth, they're denied entry into Australia, and then they let someone like John Podesta in. It's because it's all very much linked in. It's one big club, like George Carlin said, and that's how they're able to go undetected. And then when they have the media on their side, they throw them softball questions and then try and portray them like they're a good, upstanding figure in the community. So it's all rigged, very much. That's how the system's designed.
It is all rigged. Every political party in Australia, and I've researched them all of the founders of every political party in Australia are in fact Freemason Demolays. And you can identify that by finding out who founded the parties and where did they go to school.
Yes, it's very alarming. And there's a Freemason lodge nearly in every town. And you see it, sometimes they sponsor the highway, they try and do good things as well, to put up a smoke screen.
That's exactly right. It's a smoke screen. It's a deflection tactic. in order to hoodwink the people to think, oh, couldn't possibly be involved in that. But the fact of the matter is they are. If you need proof of that, then you have to look closely at John Morrison in recent times, our Prime Minister's father. You have to look very closely at who he was and where and when he was involved.
Exactly.
This incident with Brian Houston, it also includes Fred Nile. Once Alistair Webster lost his seat in the mid-90s, he was then run as a candidate for the Australian Christians, Fred Nile's party. He ran him as a candidate 3 times in the state elections. Fred Nile is involved in this network of filth at an alarming rate. Darren Hinch is just a deflection, a distractive tool. He is in fact a Freemason Demolay. He was educated at New Plymouth Boys High School in New Zealand. He was in the media, planted in the media, that is intentional. And he sat in our federal parliament and yet said absolutely nothing about the parliamentary pedophile protecting suppression orders. He didn't sit there alongside Senator Heffernan, did he? He was absent. Anyone looking at that video, pay close attention. Bill Heffernan sits alone. Why is that, Australia? When every normal Australian knows incest and paedophilia are wrong. Where was Pauline Hanson? Where was Jackie Lambie? Where was Scott Morrison? Where was Barnaby Joyce? Where was Bill Shorten? Where was Tanya Plibersek? Bill Heffernan stood alone, Australia, and it's time you stood with him.
Absolutely.
And we need to send these letters to our Governor, Generals, federally, and our state governor, and they need to go today.
But they certainly do. And that's a tactic they like to use. They'll set up a controlled opposition. Someone like Darren Hinch, you think, oh, he's doing really good work. He's going to expose these criminals. He's going to bring them down. Releasing names on the radio. They think, wow, he's put himself out there. He's been jailed for trying to release names and information that he shouldn't. That's just to set someone up with a false hope that there's going to be justice coming.
That's correct. It's false hope. The people of Australia, you and me, we are the justice. And we bring justice by calling out this network of filth, which is Freemason Demolay. And we call it out every day.
Yeah, and we have to keep doing that. And it's not just prime ministers and politicians. It's also people in TV, the music industry, people in film. You look at the Lolita Express flight logs. We've got some big names, high-profile figures linked in that are engaging in this type of filthy behaviour, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I can tell you for a fact, there is not one person on the idiot box in Australia that is not connected to Freemason Demolay. I'll give you an example of this, Jeff. Bert Newton, a few years ago, got up at the Logies and was raving on about how Don Lane and Graham Kennedy used to mentor the young ones, made a joke about it, and the audience did laugh, sadly enough. What people need to understand is what he was actually referring to was in fact paedophilia, Australia. As an example, I would give you Matthew Newton. Matthew Newton was in fact educated at Xavier College, Kew in Melbourne, the same school as Bill Shorten, funny enough. And that school has been well reported and well documented as having decades and decades of involvement with relation to paedophilia. Matthew Newton, classic example. Did he have substance abuse issues? Yes. These are classic signs of paedophile abuse, by the way, Australia. They often suffer substance abuse issues as they attempt to numb the pain. They will suffer bouts of rage at the injustice that is going on around them. Has Matthew suffered bouts of rage? Yes, he has. Does Matthew remove himself from his parents? Yes, Matthew now lives in America, as far as I'm aware. And I would ask you, Australia, if you're Matthew Newton and you know how this web of incest and paedophilia is woven in Australia, You know for a fact it involves politicians, the wider judiciary and the media. If you are Matthew Newton, who do you tell?
That's it, because all avenues are blocked. That's right. You speak up and then they're instantly silenced, as well as they like to run smear campaigns to discredit anybody that comes forward.
Their favourite smear campaign is to label everyone mentally ill, which is exactly what they did with Matthew Newton. Matthew Newton is not mentally ill. Matthew Newton is an abuse victim with absolutely no hope of getting justice. And I think most of us, under the circumstances, can understand his rage. Wouldn't you be enraged if you were Matthew Newton? I both know that incest and paedophilia are wrong. You and I therefore both know suppression orders are wrong. Their silence convicts them all now. Their silence tells us they are in fact involved in this network of filth that is Freemason Demolay in Australia. Their silence convicts them now.
Yeah, it certainly does. And that Hillsong Church, they're false prophets, pushing God and religious values, but when it comes down to what's occurring behind the scenes, it's nothing short of immoral and horrible. And then they're linked in, Scott Morrison, and a lot of the victims now are waiving anonymity to have their story told. A lot of people are embarrassed, they feel ashamed, and they're willing to put that aside and come out, reveal their information and what took place. We have to go to enormous lengths to bring these people down, don't we?
Yes, indeed. My research indicates to me, Jeff, that the head honchos of every religion in Australia are in fact Freemason Demolays. The head honchos of every religion, regardless of branding, are in fact Freemason Demolays. You can identify that by knowing the answers to these questions. Where did you go to school? And who's your daddy? Religious branding, I believe, is actually a shield they use to hide themselves and con the people, the same as they do with charities. There has been more than enough money donated across Australia for the 3,000 fire victims that lost their homes. More than enough money has been donated to rebuild all of those homes, and yet those fire victims are still living in tents today.
Yeah.
Why is that, Australia? In relation to charities, we'll talk for a moment about the chap in Victoria from the Guide Dogs Association that in fact stole over $250,000 from the guide dogs in Victoria. He did in fact face a Freemason Demolay judge. He got a slap on the wrist and went on his merry way. He is in fact a Freemason Demolay from a Freemason Demolay family and educated at a Freemason Demolay school. So I would say to my fellow Australians, do not donate to any major charity. Keep your money in your pocket, because what you are actually feeding is in fact their Freemason Demolay charities. Their network of filth, because the people appointed to being the head honchos of these charities are in fact Freemason Demolays. And I would urge every Australian to in fact Google and research the CEOs of any charity in Australia and drill down until you know where they went to school and who's their daddy.
Yeah, well said. It's really something so low as to take advantage of another person's generosity. They want to donate to a charity, but unbeknownst to them, it's just a front for child trafficking. And if you look at the CEOs, they're driving around in $100,000 cars, living in mansions. The money's not being designated to the victims. It's one big scam. And it's not just one charity, it's all of them, especially the major ones, Red Cross. It's like it's structured that way.
Is it? The other question everyone needs to ask themselves is, why is it our politicians are always, especially during their maiden speeches are very useful research tools, Australia. Most of our politicians like to claim to fame that they're involved with some sort of charity. Mm-hmm. A lot of them like to claim they're a patron of a charity. You know, a lot of them like to claim they set up a charity And it's just a mechanism they use to try and portray themselves as good people, when in actual fact, they are not good people. They are Freemason Demolays hiding within our communities, and we will no longer tolerate this. Every Australian needs to learn the skills, how to identify a Freemason Demolay, and then we need to make sure we never again elect any Freemason Demolay to any parliament in Australia.
That's right. And it's both sides too, the Liberal Party and then Labor, as well as in the States, Republican.
All the minor parties are involved. All the minor parties are involved as well. So that interview, Jim Savage admits, yes, his father and brother are both Freemasons, yada, yada, yada. If any Australian still believes that there is any politician in Parliament that gives a shit about you, I would say to you, go have a look again at Bill Heffernan's speech and go and do the research about where your politicians went to school and who's their daddy. The silence that has continued across Australia convicts them all now, Jeff. There is no doubt.
That's right. And it seems like to excel in the arts, it's a prerequisite. You have to belong to either a Scientology lodge or with Freemasons. That's there is absolutely nobody in Australia, I can tell you that now, there is absolutely nobody in Australia that is of fame of any sort across any of the arts. They are all, in fact, Freemason Demolays, and you know that, because if they weren't, they'd be calling out the filth, as Bill Heffernan did, and yet all of them are silent. That's right. And it's not just the men either.
Patty Newton, for a start, she started as a very young girl at the beginnings of television. What does that tell you, Australia?
Exactly. And it's not just the men either that are involved in this horrific satanic practice. The women are also involved in Freemason lodges. They have their own chapter, Order of Eastern Star. And once again, they try to say, yeah, they're just doing arts and crafts, helping with charity.
No, they're not.
No, not at all. Far from it.
Not at all. Demolay is actually the Freemason order for boys between the ages of 12 and 21 and the daughters of Master Masons. What happens within Demolay is boys between 12 and 21 firstly must refer to their leaders as daddy. Isn't that disturbing? And all of these Demolay chapters are in fact assigned either, there's 4 categories, it's a duchess, a princess, a little sis or a sweetheart. And those girls that have those labels are in fact the daughters of Master Masons. They are in fact networked to the Demolay boys between the ages of 12 and 21. It is in fact very, very disturbing once you research it, as I have done. Anybody that is interested, you can find the research materials on my Facebook page, Karen Brewer, or you can in fact just Google Demolay. The girls' orders of Freemasonry are Job's Daughters, Rainbow Girls and Temple. This is in fact the girls' network for girls under 21, starting from toddlers. Isn't that disturbing, Australia?
It sure is.
But these are in fact, and it's every Australian, every normal Australian knowing these details, we will in fact knock down this web of filth, and we will in fact clean our judicial system up, and we'll turn this country around in, I estimate, under 5 years. But what we need to be absolutely certain of is that we never again elect any Freemason Demolay to a parliament in Australia, to any level of government in Australia, ever again. We need to elect average Joe Aussies.
Exactly. We need to restore proper morals and integrity back into politics. Make sure that everybody is looked after, not just the upper class, and conducting these satanic rituals out of the eye of the public. We need to abolish these practices immediately. We have to use all the resources possible. Social media,
and we need to break the
internet.
cycle. We need to break the cycle. And the cycle goes like this. The people elect the Freemason politicians unknowingly. The politicians write the legislation. The politicians appoint judges.
Yeah.
So the people actually have the justice systems in their hand, but what the people don't realise in great numbers yet, but hopefully that is changing, that they are all connected via Freemason Demolay. And we average Joe Australians, we are never again electing any Freemason Demolay. I would urge my fellow Australians to draw a line through every name on every ballot paper. Do not ever place a number in a box on a ballot paper if you don't know the detail about who that person is. Secondly, if you do in fact have a candidate that you are 100% sure of that is not a Freemason Demolay, that candidate has in fact agreed to revoking suppression order laws and releasing those documents to the public unredacted. That candidate has in fact agreed to revoking the Australia Act. I would say to you, then you will put a number 1 on a ballot paper and you will cross every other name out. We are never again as a people engaging in any sort of preference voting ever again.
Exactly, that's the strategy we have to take. And they also recruit students when they're graduating from university.
Yes, they do.
They like to send elderly women down handing out pamphlets to law students that are graduating. Some people are naive. They haven't heard a lot about it and they think it could be a good way to network, increase their portfolio, gain revenue and attract more business. So they think, well, this could be a very good option, but they don't realise until that they're committed. Years of indoctrination, they start to realise that they're involved in a satanic cult, and by that stage, a lot of the time, they've already been through the rituals and it's too late, they've taken the oath. And
that's right.
And
so we're going to beat this by average Joe Australians knowing how to detect a Freemason Demolay and making sure we never again elect them. But in the meantime, I would urge my fellow Australians, please send the 2 letters I am asking you to send to the Governor-General and to the Governor in your state, because we must rise up and expose this network of filth, and we don't have a moment to waste.
Exactly. And they keep pushing this divide and conquer strategy. They want us all arguing over football teams, arguing over vaccinations, arguing over everything, instead of looking at who the real sinister characters are, the ones that are orchestrating these crimes. We're too focused on each other. And that's how come you look at them. They're so organised, they're so loyal to each other. It goes back to the oath that were taken back at the lodge, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And I would say to my fellow Australians, look no further than Senator Bill Heffernan's speech. If you know that incest and pedophilia are wrong, then you have a duty to make sure everybody knows about Senator Heffernan's speech. Our politicians cannot be trusted. Our media cannot be trusted. No. So we the people must in fact be the Bush Telegraph now.
Exactly. And there's so many sinister motives here at play. And now with COVID-19, we've got police barging into people's homes to check if they're self-isolating. It's all been pushed through under the Health Act. Now, they just seem to get away with this tyrannical measures being taken. They're operating with full immunity, and people feel powerless, don't they?
But we're not powerless. We're going to call out this network of filth, and we're going to bring and restore justice for the first time in Australia.
Well, this has been a very important broadcast. All the links will be in the description. Contact your local members of parliament, send through the letters to where Karen described, and let's hope we can restore power and have hope for the future, for ourselves, families, and for the children of the next generation. Thank you for coming on the show, Karen.
It was lovely to talk to you, Jeff. Together as a people, we stand. So let's educate all of our fellow Australians on the network of Freemason, Demolay across Australia. Where did you go to school? Who's your daddy? And call it out, Australia. Enough is enough.
Excellent. Keep up the fantastic work. Well, that does it for today's show. Exercise caution when it comes to these charities and think twice before donating. If you'd like to support the show here, become a patron and help fund the operation where we expose child trafficking and try and bring down these predators. Until next time, stay vigilant, and I'll catch you here back on the show where we expose corruption, one episode at a time.